Welcome, video gamers. It's been a while, probably since, maybe 2 years ago. I don't know. Welcome. My name's Derek Fauska. I'm a video gamer, and I don't know. Last time I did this, I did like a video game pickups kind of thing. So I'm just trying to share it. Feel free to comment, and we can kind of go from there if you'd like to talk about things. Basically, I'm just sharing some of the retro games that I've picked up over the last year or so. And some people have asked me, Mike McFly, who has his own skating channel, actually. He also has a G.I. Joe action figures kind of channel. And I don't know, he hadn't seen a video of mine in a while, so I told him kind of on a lark, yeah, sure, I'll give it a shot. So these are some of the games that I've picked up over really the last year or so, because it really has been a while since I picked up things. I've probably purchased over 200 games in the last year. So this is just some of them, and hopefully it's entertaining and insightful to you. I'll share my thoughts or whatever. So one of the cool things that's happening right now are these really neat bringbacks by Retrobit. Retrobit has been bringing back Mega Drive games that, quite frankly, were not released in the United States. And they're beautiful kind of reproductions of the original, kind of love letters really to what they were. And they're really beautiful gems. A lot of them are shooters, which of course was something that I think the kind of games that stand the test of time. And one of them is, like you hear, Glay Lancer, Advanced Buster Hawk. Pretty fun game, and has kind of a cool dust cover there. I'll just move this real quick. You can see my my gun safe and all that, but kind of the whole thing. They do a really good job. They make the nice plastic clamshell cases. The game on the inside looks great, beautiful. They didn't make a lot of these. I only made about 5,000 of these reproductions. So you can see my thing on there. I think it says 1,037 out of 5,000 that they remade. And again, kind of a cool red Sega Genesis case there, because that's really what the original cover looked like. You just saw a picture of the Advanced Buster Hawk fighter, and again, pretty awesome side-scrolling shooter. I don't know, one of those games again that I guess I really didn't know much about. But I saw the screenshots. I saw, just that's how old video gaming used to be. Sometimes the picture up front didn't always tell you the whole story. And seeing this young girl running along, I know there's a little bit of glare here. Okay, there we go. Running through space. I don't know if I was a kid in the 90s and I saw that cover, would that make me want to buy the game? Or what would I think the game was about? I probably wouldn't think it was a shooter. And so back then, you looked at the back of the game because it had those screenshots, and then you really kind of found out maybe what you were getting into. And like I said, Retrobit did an outstanding job of putting this together, making it look pretty much as it would have back in the 1990s when this game was released. I believe it was 91 or 92. It's set in 2025. So this is what's going to happen next year, folks. We're going to get invaded by a space army, and hopefully we have an Advanced Buster Hawk to save the Earth. So anyway, it's pretty cool. I had played it actually a little bit on my Mega SG analogs, basically Sega Genesis system. And I got that kind of jailbroke and played the ROM. And yeah, it's a really fantastic game. And in all of its FPGA glory that the Mega SG gives it. So one of the cool ones, and I'm glad I was able to pick this one up. Okay, so there's that. Sorry, I'm just putting it back in its dust cover. Another classic. This is SNK's Metal Slug for Sega Saturn. In case you guys didn't know, these are going to be a series of pickups that'll show everything from the NES to Super Nintendo to Sega Genesis, as you just saw, Sega CD, and then now Sega Saturn. Um, Obviously, the Japanese library for the Sega Saturn is much greater because Sega Saturn was a much bigger success in Japan than it was in the United States. And I always saw, people playing, Metal Slug, usually for the Neo Geo, and I wanted to play it for myself. And seeing it in the Saturn library was something that was really special. I really kind of liked kind of the cartoony, almost like anime, like I guess animation to it with kind of the pixel art, and it is a really fun one. I mean, it gives you the whole feel of like really what the run and gun arcade kind of experience is. The game can be brutally tough, but it's also brutally cool. The kind of the over the top, with the vehicles and whatnot, and just the insane situations that you're put in through as you're gunning your way through everything is pretty awesome. And when I saw there was a Saturn release for it in Japan, I had to jump on that. So I'm really glad I pulled the trigger on that one, pun intended. So that's Metal Slug by SNK. Unfortunately, mine doesn't have the back cover with the screen. I guess with the screenshots and like you typically find in a video game. So that's unfortunate, but overall, it's a pretty fantastic game. And in my opinion, if you have like your replay cart, so you can play it like region free on your Saturn, definitely it's a must get in my opinion. Another really good must get of another Japanese Saturn classic is Strikers 1945. I actually originally had downloaded this game on my Nintendo Switch first. I bought it off the online store because they were releasing these things. Strikers 1945 is by Atlas. Atlas makes really good stuff, and this is a fantastic vertical shooter. Kind of like really an upgraded version of 1942 or 1943 or 1944. Of course, you see the P-38 Lightning, and that, of course, brings you to 1942 or 1943 for sure. But this has a series of other aircraft, a Spitfire, a P-51D Mustang, Me-109 fighter, a Japanese Shinden fighter, which would have been used if we would have continued to be at war with Japan, maybe into 1946. It's a fantastic game. Each plane has kind of its own strengths and weaknesses in terms of the firepower. Some have little helper planes that come out and help. They go out and strike actively. Others kind of join up with you, kind of like basically a vertical version of like what you see for like Gradius, for lack of a better description for anybody that knows a basic shooter. Anyway, Strikers 1945 was fantastic. I really enjoyed playing it on the Switch. I know it was also a very successful arcade title in Japan. I have seen one. There's a local campground in our area where I live, and they actually had this game on there, which I thought that was incredibly cool. It's a fun one. It's very tough. When you're kind of flying into space and you're World War II plane, that's kind of where it loses some of the historic appeal to it. Gets a little weird, but it's a really classic one. And again, it was one that I wanted to get on the Saturn just to experience it and kind of in the way that it was originally presented. So pretty awesome game. So Strikers 1945. Okay. Maybe this shouldn't surprise anybody. Here's another really cool game from Retrobit. So again, Retrobit's done a lot of things where they have taken old Sega Genesis games and they've kind of just brought them back in kind of maybe kind of a bit of a remaster kind of way, where they kind of update the art, the box stuff, and all that kind of thing to make a more attractive package. Not that it was terrible before, but it just basically kind of makes it look it kind of, like I said, it's basically a love letter to these kinds of games, like you saw with Clay Lancer. So this is Renovation's Soldice, probably known better by the Soul Feast game for Sega CD, which was actually kind of a cheap title. And you fly this ship here. Kind of a interesting kind of ship that fires in two directions as you go along. So that's what it looks like outside of the box cover, or outside the dust cover there. Okay. Again, you can see your ship, the typical kind of Japanese anime kind of characters. And again, here's your screenshots. Like I said, this is what we would have seen back in the 1990s when this game was originally released. And it's a hard game. Your ship has kind of a big hitbox, which is kind of a drawback to it, given some of the tight spaces that you come into. One thing about Soldice is they have a lot of levels where they really try to box you in and really limit your movement. And with a ship with a big hitbox, needless to say, things get tight really fast. So just like any shooter, it requires a lot of memorization of kind of the levels and where things are going to close up. Otherwise, you can get a lot of maybe kind of cheap deaths for you. But definitely a good one. And again, I'm glad another one where I'd say I'm really glad that Retrobit did kind of this reboot on it. And again, like Glade Lancer, I was really happy to pick it up. And by the way, Retrobit continues to post stuff like out there. So if that's, if you're a person like myself who maybe kind of came into Sega Genesis a little later, I was kind of a Nintendo guy. And so for myself, I didn't have a lot of like personal nostalgia about Genesis games, just simply because I mainly played Nintendo. So I kind of am a late arrival. And obviously some of these games are obviously very expensive, especially shooters. And if it's a good one, it's very expensive. And, that's not the easiest thing for people. And, some of these titles are, again, like with Clay Lancer and others, they're really only in Japan kind of things. And so this is a way to have that back. And I think at relatively an affordable price. So I don't know, I'd recommend it to anybody. I'm also buying games made by kind of like these new, I don't want to call them homebrews because I think that's almost, I don't think homebrew is like an insult. But when I think of homebrew, I literally think of like a guy in his house brewing beer. So it kind of makes me, I don't know, I feel like it doesn't do credit. So this is more, I guess, maybe an indie studio game. That's probably a better way to say it. And this is from a French indie game developer called Broke Studio. They're out of Paris in France. And this was a game they came up with called The Cursed Knight. I know people like to use the term Metroidvania. I guess that's kind of what it is. It's a kind of a platformer. To me, the game kind of reminds me somewhere between Metal Storm and Mega Man meets a little bit of kind of a Strider-like game, which might seem like a really weird combination of things, because there is a slasher mechanic in the game, so you can kill enemies up close with kind of a slash, plus doing like your normal shooting kind of stuff. And then like Metal Storm, you can kind of, there's one of the things you're gonna have to master in this game is flipping the gravity, where it flips it from where you go from being on the roof to being at normal like ground level, and that takes a little bit to get used to. The game tries to kind of introduce it to you early, and then of course as you go through different levels, then it just kind of becomes something you go to without too much thought. It's like riding a bike, I guess. The art in this game is fantastic. Some of the bosses, it's amazing what they're able to do with a 16-bit game today. And again, that's no slight to people that, the games as they came back in the 90s, but it's amazing what they're able to pack into these games in terms of graphics, where I'm not going to say there's a three-dimensional element, but The bosses are big, they're well animated, it looks really smooth. I know that GameSack did a review of this game, and one of their criticisms was, and I would agree with both of them, sometimes the music's a bit crazy, or it doesn't really match the feel of the level, and I would agree that's a fair criticism. The other one that Joe Redifer on GameSack talked about, and I agree, having played it, is the I guess kind of the driving stages. They have these side-scrolling kind of driving stages where you're like in this bike, and kind of like the gripe I had with Soldice is you have such a massive hitbox because you're riding this like kind of like Tron like bike or hover bike, and it takes up a huge amount of space. So it's easy to get damaged. And the other thing is, to me, they're not that fun. I don't like them. In fact, I hate them. And I don't know. To me, it's kind of the platforming in the levels and the game itself is just fine. I don't know why they chose to add that element, but they did. So that's my only complaint, is that part I would, if there was a way just to not do that or put that in the game, I would have. If I was the person producing it, I would have said, I understand you like these, but this isn't good. It doesn't fit. But whatever, that was their choice. But it's a really interesting game. And again, they made it so it looks like your classic kind of Mega Drive kind of thing. And I don't know, it's a good one. Here's another one from another, I think, French developer. This is from Neofid Studios, and again, it's Mega Drive style, European. It's called Demons of Astaborg, and pretty awesome game. Again, impressive what they're able to put into a 16-bit game. You have a double jump ability, which of course everyone loves when they're doing kind of a platforming, kind of Castlevania-ish style of game. There's a bit of puzzling in the game where you have to be kind of clever in terms of figuring out maybe how to release, certain triggers and locks and things and doors. So there's that part of this is on top of the platforming, which is kind of fun. It can be kind of frustrating though, because it's easy. If you don't really understand what to do, you can kind of feel like you're in a dead end and there really isn't another place to go. But overall, the quality of the game is really well done. I like the dialogue. It's kind of unexpected. It's a bit raw. There's some swearing and stuff like that, which I guess I wasn't really expecting to see. I don't know. Not that I'm saying like detracts from the game. It just wasn't what I was expecting. But definitely a fun one. And I don't know. I love the Mega Drive case it came with. And again, the levels are really actually quite gorgeous on it. And again, this would definitely be one I would recommend to people looking for kind of a new experience, kind of, if they want to have the feeling of an old, a really new version of like a Castlevania-ish game without it being Castlevania. Demons of Astaborg is a good one. I know one of the other gripes on this game when it was originally produced was the beveling on the actual cartridge. People were talking about how it wasn't beveled correctly and that it might damage it. I'll be honest, I'm not the most savvy on understanding that. But I guess I would just say, if you purchase one, take a look at that. I know that it can be, I want to say a little bit, I think you can remedy that with some sandpaper. I wouldn't know, but that's something you may want to read into. But mine's just fine. My Mega SG works fine, and so it hasn't been an issue for me. So I don't know. Again, I can only speak to kind of my own experience on that. Okay, here's another one. This is from Strictly Limited. This is out of Great Britain, and this is called Darius Extra Version. Really what it was, it took the Darius games, which are notoriously difficult, and kind of mellows out the difficulty a tad. And I do mean a tad. This game is still damn hard. but compared to the originals like Sagaya and others, it's a little more approachable. And that's the one thing I would say. I mean, I know people love a good challenging experience, but unless you're, until you quote unquote get good, um, it's not. It's kind of off-putting sometimes to play a game that just brutally kicks your ass and then you're done. And Darius Extraversion tries to be kind of a happy medium. And so I don't know. I guess I was kind of intrigued by that because I do have some Darius games and they are tough. And I don't know. I was looking for something to see if I would enjoy it better. And I don't want to say it failed for me, but I don't know. I still need to work at it just to even get good at Darius Extraversion, let alone the other Darius games. So I'm still working at it, but at least for me, it feels a little bit more achievable with this version than maybe those others. So, anyways, I just thought that I don't know. I just thought that was something kind of cool that a gaming company did, where they tried again to maybe help the player a little bit, but also staying within the spirit of the game. It's not like a completely easy Darius game. It's still tough. It's still challenging, but it's just not stiflingly difficult. Okay, so that's Darius Extra. This one's by Retro Bit. They brought back Mega Man, the Wily Wars. Now, interestingly, this game, I'm a huge Mega Man fan. That's probably my favorite platformer. And again, I told you I didn't have a lot of experience with Genesis, and honestly, I didn't even know Mega Man was on the Genesis, but it was. There's a lot of criticism about the Genesis versions compared to the NES counterparts. The NES counterparts are just a lot better, even though the graphics and the sound are a little sharper, given the fact that it's 16-bit versus 8-bit. But again, I didn't know about that when I first started this game, and it's okay. It's not my favorite version of it, but at the same time, I guess since I enjoy Mega Man games and I like physical media, it was just something that I wanted to go and purchase. And I've gone out and purchased as much Mega Man stuff as I can, and so I guess you could say they had me at Mega Man at that point. So when I saw the Retrobit release of it, I decided to jump on that. So I don't know, kind of different. Okay, I got a number of other games. This first one was actually inspired by my my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law told me, he asked me if I had ever played Saturday Night Slam Masters by Capcom. And so this is a pro wrestling game on the Super Nintendo. This game's still fairly cheap. It's about $20. And, pro wrestling games in general, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm the biggest fan in the world. And, this isn't affiliated with, WWF or WCW as it would have been back in the 1990s. So they're just kind of made up wrestlers or whatever. And the game kind of feels like you're playing like a wrestling version of like Final Fight. And it's pretty funny. I mean, pro wrestling is, of course, over the top. And this game kind of captures that, even though there is no like familiarity of the characters, which, let's face it, that's part of what makes pro wrestling what it is that you have this, you understand who the different wrestlers are, you know a little bit about them as a, their personality or whatever you want to call it, the character that they are. And so you don't really have that kind of cultural reference. But if you're looking for something that's kind of an off the wall, but still solid wrestling game, I don't think you can beat it, because a lot of the licensed titles, whether it was WWF, a lot of them were really disappointing for what you got. Like, it wasn't quite as good as the arcades that were always out there to find and play. And so you kind of always felt kind of disappointed. This game, because as far as I could tell, I never saw a Saturday Night Slam Masters arcade game. it gives you the arcade feel, which I think Capcom did a really good job with that. Whether it was Final Fight or Street Fighter 2, their games delivered that arcade experience at home, which that was the huge selling point of really those 16-bit games themselves, that you could have that arcade experience. And this felt more like an arcade experience than, like I said, the licensed titles delivered on the same system. Next one is another one that was recommended by my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law is a big Atari collector. And I don't know if that was what inspired him or not, but this is Absolute's Turn and Burn No Fly Zone. It's basically kind of I guess it's, for lack of a better term, it's your flight simulator for a 16-bit system, which is pretty ambitious. You're not dealing with like a PC here. I've played a lot of flight simulators, like, well, there was Microsoft Flight Simulator on the PC, or Aces of the Pacific, or Strike Commander by Origin. I would say I was fairly well versed in flight simulators, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, I never really knew that there was a flight simulator kind of option on the Super Nintendo, and I wish I did, because this one's actually pretty fun. It's an ambitious thing to do, to try to put a three-dimensional flight simulator. Again, is it going to be as good as a PC? No, but it's not terrible, and it feels like a flight simulator in terms of your limited view. Just like Wing Commander is a pretty decent port of the computer game as a space flight simulator. I think Turn and Burn No Fly Zone does a pretty good job of that. And again, it's a cheap game. This is a game I see all the time in kind of the bargain bins at places like Gaming Generations, or kind of those retro game stores where they always have probably Super Nintendo games under like $20. I've always seen this game in the pile. So I would imagine it'd be a pretty simple, available game to try, and probably a lot of people just look at it and think it's weird or whatever, and they don't really think much about it. But I think you could do a lot worse for something around $15-16. So, good game. Okay, here's another one. I actually came across this just looking through kind of the library of Super Nintendo games, and this game is called Time Slip. This is by Vic Tokai. Vic Tokai is kind of a publisher, probably best known for the Gogol 13 series from like Nintendo, or Clash at Demon Head. But anyways, they came up with this game. This is kind of a time-traveling run-and-gun kind of game. So similar to maybe like Time Tracks or Turrican in a way. Although it's actually pretty cool. You go through these different ages, time periods. So you're fighting basically aliens. It's like an alien invasion where they've used time machines to go back in the past to try to thwart humanity's future. And so you go in this little, capsule. It kind of looks similar to like the Animus from Assassin's Creed. And then you get shipped back in time, or sent back in time rather. And you're fighting these aliens that have, are appearing as human beings, like let's say in the Middle Ages or ancient Egypt or things like that. And the levels are, again, in those different parts of the world. And so it's kind of a unique take. Game kind of has a feel a lot like Super Star Wars by JVC, which is actually a pretty fun platformer. Like Super Star Wars, there are some times where the platforming is pretty, you have to be pretty nimble, and if you fall, you can lose a lot of progress just by falling back down to the ground, which can be very frustrating because you feel like you lost 10 minutes of work. But the game is kind of interesting and kind of unique. It's not terribly expensive. It's about $30. So again, kind of a unique one that I don't think too many people talk about. I'm not going to call it a hidden gem, because I know that gets kind of teased about, but I don't know, it's not bad. It's not a bad game. Again, one that you don't really hear anybody talking about. So, Time Slip by Victor Kai. Here's another one. This is Mystic Quest, Final Fantasy. One thing I really like is this plastic shell cases that they make now. I know there's a company on Etsy that makes these, and I think that's kind of cool because Nintendo games, of course, came in the paper boxes, and for the most part, a lot of us just threw those away. And I know for the people that are like all the complete in box kind of gamers out there, there that of course is where some of the money is, and maybe we're kicking ourselves in a way if you're a collector for not keeping those around. So I always felt like the Genesis, because they had those plastic hard shell cases, kind of had an unfair advantage because there was just so much practicality in keeping the cases around for Genesis games. Typically people kept them, whereas the Nintendo ones, they just ended up being trash eventually, even if you did keep it around for a while. And so kind of the reintroduction of these plastic cases to me is kind of a cool idea, a way to keep them protected, also a way to display it a little bit better. And so this is Mystic Quest, kind of seen as like a beginner level Final Fantasy game. I'm not the biggest role-playing game or RPG kind of guy, and I know this is kind of teased for its kind of watered-down approach. But a buddy of mine named Joey Wygen, who has his own podcast called Video Game Flashback, you should give it a listen if you can. He kind of got me onto the game, and he admitted that it's not the same as like Final Fantasy 2 or Final Fantasy 3 on the Super Nintendo, but he did celebrate it for what it was. I mean, the other part of it is it was a cheaper game, so it was a good way to get somebody introduced into it, and a person could then decide if they wanted to go and spend the extra money to get that class, the AAA title like Final Fantasy 2 or Final Fantasy 3, which were much more expensive. So I felt it was kind of a good way to introduce people into an RPG if you're not a person that normally gets into one, basically see if they like it kind of thing. I don't know. I purchased this one on eBay. I actually didn't know that it was going to come in a plastic case. I know some people talk about fakes and things like that. I guess I don't really care to a certain extent. I certainly didn't pay like $100 or anything. I paid really what the retail price is. So I guess if they cheated me, they cheated me, but at least I guess it came in a nice case. So that's Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. Okay, since I talked about complete in box, this is ASP, which stands for Airstrike Patrol by Sega. This is a complete in box game where it has the case and they put it in a little, protector, I guess, so that the box stays nice, which I guess I'm keeping around. Kind of like a Jungle Strike kind of game. Obviously very much influenced by the Gulf War back in the early 90s. So, a lot of different companies had games that were kind of similar to this, where it featured ground attack, things like, whether it's Apache helicopters or something like that. And like you see in the picture here, you have an A-10 Warthog attacking targets in the desert. Go figure. I mean, Desert Storm was going on, and so everyone was kind of tapping into that Gulf War kind of combat. And I don't know, Sega's not a big publisher, so I must admit that kind of gravitated me towards it, and it's kind of a unique game. I liked some of the sequences of it all, and there's different aircraft that you can fly based on the mission. And a lot of it, of course, is very much inspired by Desert Storm. So, you're taking on Scud missile sites and things like that. I just thought it was kind of cool. So, I don't know. That's ASP, a game that not a game you find in the wild very often. And admittedly, I think I found that I want to say I found that on eBay. I could be wrong. Here's another one, again, with a plastic case, which I appreciate. This is another Sega game, which again, you don't see very often. This is called Musya, the classic Japanese tale of horror. Now, I learned about this game while watching an episode of Friday Night Arcade. He was talking about Super Nintendo games that were scary. And, again, this is no criticism of Friday Night Arcade's portrayal of it. But he had talked about games like, what is it, Aliens? The zombie game, Zombies Ate My Neighbors, I think was one of them, by Konami. And some of these games are kind of maybe freaky, but others are, kind of meant to be kind of bizarre or weird. I think Porky Pig's Haunted Adventure was in there too. And again, they're not necessarily like bone-chillingly scary, but one of the games that he thought was kind of neat was Musya, which is kind of a Japanese centered Castlevania-like game, except for instead of a man with a whip like Simon Belmont or Trevor Belmont or whichever Belmont, your character carries kind of a spear. My only the level design is very dark, kind of, spooky, which is kind of what Friday Night Arcade was getting at. My main criticism is the character is so stiff. Stiff, almost like not. The only thing that's more stiff in a video game is maybe like Altered Beast on Sega Genesis. Your character is just so stiff. I find that's a bit off-putting, but the art design, the music, is really pretty unique and really interesting. And it's kind of a spendy game, but again, it's another game that I thought was kind of cool. And kind of after hearing his description, I thought to myself, that's a game I want to pick up. And I don't know, I found this one. I know it's authentic. And then it came with this cool, again, plastic case, which again, I kind of appreciate, just because, I don't know, like, again, I think that this is a lot more utilitarian, but again, the level design is really good. The enemies are kind of gross because they're kind of steeped in like this idea of kind of like Shinto, which is the Japanese religion of Japan. So there's like, big eyeballs and stuff like that. So again, it's kind of like a Japanese Castlevania. So pretty cool, but kind of an unusual North American release. Yeah, this is, like I said, this is another game you just don't see out in the wild that often. Okay, this is This is actually a game. This is actually a computer game, I guess, that was popular in France. It's called Lavage de Morts. This is again by Broke Studio, the same people that produced Cursed Night. And they had programmed Lavage de Morts, which was this computer game, and they put it onto the Nintendo. And this is one where I guess I wish I would have done some research before I purchased it. The game itself is not bad. However, and you'll see where this I don't want to say complaint because it's my fault. The game is incredibly short. So I purchased it. Obviously, it's from Europe, so you're paying in euros. And I probably paid something close to the equivalent of maybe like $70. And if you watch a long play of this game, it's about 8.5 minutes total. And that's not a speedrunner. That's just the person they're not wasting a lot of time, but it's also not a person like a speedrunner just running through the game as literally as fast as they can. they're going through it quickly, but there isn't a whole lot to the game. And I guess I wish I would have known that, having spent that kind of money. It's unusual for a couple reasons. A platformer, I would say it's probably what we call a puzzle platformer, in kind of a dark time. It's set like in the, I want to say like the 15 or 1400s, and it's based on an actual historical event where members of the Knights Templar kill this religious order, and you are a monk who escapes into your abbey, which is kind of, well, it's called the Abbey of the Dead. That's what I think Lavage de Morts translates to. And you get these crosses, and once you get, I think, the 12 crosses or the 9 crosses, then you get into a fight with Satan. And I don't want to spoil the ending, but the ending's a bit of a downer. It's a bit of a downer. And I don't know, I haven't gotten to the ending myself. I've seen it with a long play, but or a very short long play, as it I should say. But the game's kind of frustrating, kind of tough. You have no offensive abilities, so from a gaming from a I guess a perspective of instead of being like Castlevania or Mega Man, where you have some kind of object that you can destroy enemies with, you have nothing like that in this game. The only thing you really can do is jump. So basically, you're avoiding enemies all the time, and you have 9 lives, and it's not hard to lose them, and you just have to be really clever. So it's really like puzzle platforming, and it's just frustrating that you really can't do anything to deal with your enemies, because you're so used to that as a gamer. Basically you're removing obstacles, but this game you don't really have that ability. So that's what makes this game hard and frustrating. And again, like I said, I didn't know at the time it was excessively short, but it is. So I don't know. That's Lavage de Morts. Okay, here's another kind of retro bring back. This is also by Strictly Limited out of England, and this is Natsume's Wild Guns. I have to admit, when I first saw this game on the library for the Super Nintendo, I was immediately intrigued because it looks a lot like Cowboys versus Aliens, which is that weird movie with, I think, Harrison Ford and Daniel Craig set in the Wild West when they fight these aliens. And mind you, this is a game from the 90s. This is long before that movie was probably even thought of. And it's kind of follows that same path. You are these cowboys, either the guy or the girl, and it is an on-rail shooter. And it's what they call a gallery shooter. So instead of like, I would say it's kind of similar. It's like a Western version, really, of Operation Wolf in a way, except for the aliens come out of all over the place and you're blasting at them. And there's bosses and boss fights and things like that. It's pretty crazy. But Strictly Limited did kind of a remaster of this game, and I just thought it looked beautiful. And unfortunately, I didn't initially purchase it. So what I ended up doing is finding it on an eBay site, and so I purchased the game there instead. So it's virtually brand new, and the game has been remastered, so the graphics are sharper, the music's a little has been improved a little bit too. So again, kind of like what we saw with Retrobit, where they take an old game and they kind of give it some love and attention to make it pop a little bit more. And that's kind of what they did with Wild Guns, because Wild Guns in the wild, no pun intended, is a very expensive game. It's a pretty rare game. So I wasn't going to spend $500 on this. So this was a much easier and cheaper substitute. So, and I don't know, then you have kind of that experience of complete in box a little bit, even though it is a reproduction, but it's a limited reproduction. So that tells you that at least there's some value there. So I don't know, pretty cool one. Okay, Sega CD. We'll go with there. We're kind of around Robo Aleste. So this, of course, is the I don't know if it's a sequel or it's basically like the CD version of like Musha for the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive. Vertically scrolling shooter. One of the more desirable titles of the Sega CD library. Beyond that, and like Snatcher. Those Snatchers worth a lot more money than some of the Lunar games, which is of course an RPG. But Robo Aleste is considered probably the best shooter on the system. And I don't know, I finally just decided to go and get it because I had purchased a lot of the best shooters for the Genesis, and having purchased a Sega CD, I don't know, I wanted to have it on there as well. So yeah, pretty awesome one. Classic. And again, with kind of the upgraded CD kind of sound quality to it. And again, not a huge fan of the tall jewel cases that they came in back then. They're terribly fragile. They're bulky. They're really terrible because they crack easily. So that's. I do know that there's a guy out there, or there's companies out there that make jewel cases like this again. So if you have one that's all cracked to hell, you can do it. This is Terminator. This is another Sega Genesis game. This is a platformer based on the original movie from 84 or 85. It's by Virgin, and it's really good. They have some cool little cutscenes that, of course, came from the actual movie. But the platforming and the stages are really unique and interesting. The other thing, when I purchased this, my brother-in-law, the same one who's the Atari collector, he had got me a gift certificate. And I don't know, it was my birthday this last winter. And it's one of those things where I go to the gaming store and I see this game in the glass case, the Terminator sitting here. And it said, I think, $200. And I'm like, ooh, I don't know, that's too... I don't want. I mean, I think the game's cool, but I don't know if I want to spend $200 today. And I remembered that I had this, gift certificate from my brother-in-law, and I don't know. He never told me how much was on it, so I kind of assumed it probably wasn't going to be a tremendous amount. And so I just kind of said, well, how much is on this gift certificate? Because I really didn't know. So I told the person they ran the gift certificate. There was like $100 on there. Like, I will take the Terminator. $100, that was within my wheelhouse totally. And so I jumped on that immediately because like I said, you don't see this game come around very often, especially on Sega CD. So again, it was a game that I kind of feel like it fell in my lap a little bit. And I don't know, it's a really good one. I don't know if you can kind of see the art, but the stage design and the parallax on it are really nice. And like I said, the CD sound is really good. So a really, really neat game. Admittedly, I've not played this last one. I kind of want to. I got this at another game store. Actually, same chain as I got the one with the Terminator, but I had never played this. This is Third World War by Extreme, which, if I remember correctly, Extreme, I want to say was Jalico. I think Jalico became Extreme, or maybe I'm wrong. Anyways, it's kind of a strategy-based kind of game where you're managing all these different things. I don't know. It's one of those games where I'm a person who I like to know about like military history, and of course the Cold War. I grew up as a Cold War kid, being a Gen Xer as I am, and so the idea of a third world war was always something that was around us, especially during the Cold War. Like whether it was Red Dawn or the day after, and you had games that like Red Alert or whatever that would come out, and that was kind of interesting, but typically never talked about the possible like nuclear holocaust. And I don't know, a game that kind of maybe talks about that a little bit. Guess I thought was kind of interesting. So um, I don't know. It was a game I picked up. It's not terribly valuable, so I'm going to guess the gameplay is not maybe particularly interesting. But I don't know. I just thought it was kind of a unique kind of thing. Kind of looks like SimCity and a lot of management, which is probably what I guess if you're into that thing, that's would interest you. But I don't know. For myself, I was willing to give it a try. Okay, I do have one Sega Saturn game, classic American release Saturn game. This is Hexen by ID Software, same people that brought you Wolfenstein. And a lot of people like to say that this is like if you took Doom, which was also made by ID Software, or Wolfenstein, and then combine it with Madge, that's what you get. And I don't think that's incredibly fair. Basically, you have 3 different wizards that you can be, and each one has like their own specialties. And the leveling, well, it's not a platformer. I mean, it's from a first-person perspective, but it's more challenging than that. You have to be careful because certain upgrades only help certain wizards and others don't. Some of the wizards are good at engaging people from a long distance. Others have like more wide scale things, but you have to build it up. It's really hard. It's really hard, but it's also really kind of unique. And I don't know. It's one of those games I remember playing on the PC. I got it on PC Gamer magazine, and I never knew that they actually had like a Saturn release for it because I didn't own the Saturn back when it came out. And so I thought, hey, that'd be a fun one to give a shot to, just to try something different. And so I did. I don't know. You kind of see some of the stage design a little bit, which is kind of unique. Where you can see you literally have like weapons in the hand, like you can see the axe in the hand. And again, a lot of people think that it's like the same engine, like where it's basically just, again, like a medieval version of our Might and Magic kind of version of Wolfenstein. And it's not. It's a little more than that. The people that design the game are different, and it has its own unique feel and experience. Okay, moving on. So this one's a little bit, tiny bit beat up. This is R-Type 3. So I kind of already mentioned Darius games being tough. Irem's R-Type games were tough as hell. R-Type 3 was made by Jalico, but the original, of course, was made by Irem. And I'm terrible at that game. And R-Type's not a very, Super R-Type's not a very difficult game to get a hold of for the Nintendo. But the third one here, or R-Type 3, is actually a pretty rare one to find. And again, kind of like with Sega Genesis, I wanted to get the best shooters for both systems. And this was definitely, up on that list. Really, the only one I don't have now for Super Nintendo is Aero Fighters by Miko River, which is like over $1,000, and I'll probably never get that one. So I can live with that. I can live with not having that one. But R-Type's a more spendy title. It's not too bad. It's just like other R-Types. It's hard. There's not as much slowdown with Super R-Type 3 or R-Type 3 than there is in like Super R-Type, where you get to some levels and it gets pretty flickery. But definitely it's your classic R-Type type game with like, you have your kind of like helper pod, and then you have weapons that, like can reflect off walls or pulsing lasers, kind of similar to the Gradius R-Type kind of experience. So that's what it is. Okay, here's another one I actually saw in that same episode of Friday Night Arcade. So same one that we saw with Musia. Another game that he talked about that he thought was spooky was this unusual title for Super Nintendo, also by Sega, called Nosferatu, which of course is one of the classic names for Dracula. And this game is different. More of a, I guess you'd almost call it a puzzle platformer. You're basically just like an average dude, and you're trying to rescue your girlfriend from Nosferatu, and you're kind of in this spooky kind of Gothic church castle thing, which of course fits into the Castlevania stuff. But instead, you're really just dodging all these different traps, different enemies, and you don't really have a lot of offensive abilities. The control in the game is a bit hokey, which at times can lead to some frustrating deaths. The other thing that makes the game tough is it has a timer. And you're not given a ton of time to navigate through the levels, so you really have to figure out what you need to do quickly because you don't have a lot of time to just sit there and figure it out. And so that kind of keeps things going. And yes, you will probably die a few times because of the clock, but hopefully you learn. So when you continue or play it again, you know what to do so you don't get timed out. But kind of a tough one. And again, it's kind of scary because of the darkness of kind of the levels and has kind of a cinematic kind of little cutscenes here and there. Kind of ambitious. And again, not a title you see very often. And I don't know, that's part of what attracted me to it. It was kind of different and unique. And I don't know, I kind of like the idea of different and unique games. So I don't know. So I picked it up. Okay. Here's another game that I actually first saw on computer. And I know this is both on the Genesis and the Super Nintendo. This is actually a game my brother used to play. It's called Syndicate. What you are these kind of, I guess you could maybe call it artificially created warriors in kind of a cyber world where you navigate kind of a place that seems very similar to like Blade Runner. So you're like a synth, I guess. You're these synthetic human beings, and you're either men or women. You have different weapons. You get different upgrades for your people. So like whether they can withstand like being burned or bullets or whatever, repairs and whatnot. And you kind of attack as like a group. So you own like this squad of like 4. And then you're trying to ambush and find different objectives. The other synths that you're going against, whether they have some object you need to get like data or whatever, to keep moving throughout the game. And it's again kind of a spendy one. It can be kind of frustrating because you have kind of an isometric level design. So you always have to kind of be aware of what may be just off your screen as you're moving your characters. Because if you're not careful with your characters or you forget about them, they can find themselves getting ambushed by other synths, and then they're just going to stand there and get killed. And then pretty soon you're done in the game. So it requires some management that you typically don't find in really a Super Nintendo game. And again, it was really a PC game that was being adapted for the 16-bit platform. And I don't know. I remember playing it with my brother, and so I guess that's the nostalgia for me. And so it was more my brother's game, but I enjoyed watching him play because it was just kind of different, kind of dark, kind of mysterious, and I don't know. So I picked it up. I know it's by Ocean, which Ocean, is notorious for normally producing not the best games. but this one's okay. Although, again, for a 16-bit platform, it's probably a little bit ambitious for what you're supposed to do. Okay, so that's Syndicate. This next one is Legend, and this is by Sega. I think I got it here. See if it focuses. The cover art's nothing to look at, but I can quickly describe like what you're supposed to do. The game is very similar to that of Golden Axe, really. Sega also did a port of Thunder Force for the Super Nintendo called Thunder Spirits, where it's basically Thunder Force 3 on the Super Nintendo. And I would say Legend, even though it isn't a complete copy of Golden Axe, it pretty much is. Like, it's basically a fantasy-style beat-em-up where you do have some limited spell-playing capability to wipe out maybe like a group of enemies, and then you do get occasional, I guess, little potions or whatever that allow you to cast those spells again. So you have to be very tactical in how you deploy that kind of magic, I guess, in the game. And that's really kind of what this game is like. It's not bad. I think in some ways the graphics are sharper. They're better than Golden Axe, which was kind of an early release Sega Genesis game. But the level is the overall level design is very dark, which for Nintendo, that didn't happen a lot. I mean, I know I described Musia that way, and I know I described Nosferatu that way. But this one was kind of darker than Golden Axe was. But I do think the graphics are better. But overall, it's pretty much, like I said, a Super Nintendo version of a game that's very similar to Golden Axe. And it's kind of a spendy game. It's about $100. So if you wanted to play Golden Axe on the Super Nintendo, you're gonna have to pay about $100 to do it. This next one, I actually, one of those games where I saw it in the case and I thought, that's interesting. The first thing that jumped out to me, it was Atlas. And this is Super Valis 4. It has a female protagonist, where basically you're kind of a run-and hack and slash kind of game. So I kind of just described Legend as being kind of a Super Nintendo version of Golden Axe. I don't want to call this Strider because it's not, because that'd be more like Run Saver. That's another Atlas game, and that is very much like basically Strider for the Super Nintendo. Super Valis is more similar, kind of like a Castlevania-ish game, although there's more running and jumping, I guess, than Castlevania. And instead of a whip, you have this sword she has. It's actually pretty tough and pretty frustrating at times. I know they made a Valis game for the Genesis as well. But again, not one that you see very much out in the wild, and I think I picked it up for like $50. From that same place I bought Terminator and the Third World War. So I don't know, it's an okay game. Again, I recommend it if you see it out in the wild. You don't see it very much. It's about $60, $60-$70 usually. Mine was a little marked up, so that's why it's a little cheaper. See the marks up on top. I know for some people that'd make them not purchase the game at all, but for myself, I wasn't gonna bicker about it too much. This next game is one that I wanted for a long, long time, actually way back in the day, and this is Evo, which is the game of, I think it's Evo Search for Eden. Yeah. Evo. This is a very unique game by Enix. Enix, of course, was famous for ActRaiser, um, mostly RPG kind of stuff. And this is kind of an RPG, except for instead of like spells and things like that, you're talking about evolution. And what you start off as is a rather simple kind of fish. And then from there, you eat other critters, which gives you experience or, I guess, evolution points. And as you go through the game, you choose and make choices how your creature evolves. So maybe it's bigger fins so you can move faster, which might make it more difficult for your little critter to get hurt. Or maybe you develop legs or sharper teeth or a stinger. Anyways, there's a whole bunch of different ways that your character or your creature can evolve, and then you'll occasionally have these like little boss battles, and depending on how I guess the attributes you've given your newly evolved creature will make either the bosses easier or more difficult to deal with. It's a really fascinating kind of concept, and I remember seeing it. I remember reading about it in a Nintendo Power magazine as a kid, and I thought it was just amazing. A game where you evolve a character, so you're thinking like of all the, tons of possibilities that you have at your disposal, and I just thought that was really neat. The only thing that sucks is if you don't know what you're not. The game has a way of like letting you know that, like as we know with evolution, if your species isn't able to adapt to the changes in the environment, you can find yourself dying out really quickly, and that's kind of how the game works too. So if you're poorly evolved, or maybe, I don't know, you weren't managing your resources correctly, you can find your critter to get in trouble pretty fast and you die out, and then suddenly that's like a lot of wasted progress. And that's kind of where the game sucks. You can go a long way, maybe play for an hour or two, and then suddenly your creature dies out, and that's it. And that's kind of a hard pill to swallow, because you feel like you did a lot of grinding to get there, only to find out you should have made different choices. Which in evolution, you don't know those choices, and your critter doesn't really always have. I mean, we don't have the choice to decide how we evolve. At least for the most part. And so, I don't know, kind of an interesting kind of concept. And again, a really unique game that, I don't know, it's one I've always wanted. It's spendy. It's over $200, but I finally was able to find a copy, and I'm glad I did. And yeah, it's hard, but I enjoy the uniqueness of it, because there really is no other game like it that I've seen, at least for a 16-bit console game. Okay, my last Super Nintendo game. This is another new one I actually just found a couple months ago, and I just picked it up. This is a game by Capcom called Knights of the Round, and best way I can describe it, again, it's kind of like a Capcom version of Golden Axe meets Final Fight. So it's really a beat 'em up in fantasy times. Unlike Golden Axe, your characters level up in this game. So as they beat people up, they actually get stronger and more powerful. There isn't spells where you clear out the board like you do in Golden Axe or Legend, but your character does get more powerful. And just like with any beat 'em up, you do have access to like a power move, which helps you kind of clear yourself out, not necessarily wipe the whole board out, but kill the enemies around you, but then it takes a little bit of your life energy. It has stuff like that. But the nice thing is, as you level up, you rarely have to tap into that. It has a bunch of bosses. The bosses are huge. They're kind of, life grinders. But it's really fun to play in co-op because you can play together, and that to me makes it that much more fun. I'd strongly recommend you play in co-op. And I don't know, to me it's kind of a hidden gem just because I never knew anybody that had a game quite like this, at least for Super Nintendo. So if you enjoyed playing like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, which was far more common, which in a lot of ways is kind of similar, although there's no leveling up, I think you'd really love Knights of the Round. And I don't know, I think it's a really cool game. So it's based on, again, like King Arthur, Percival, Lancelot. Those are really the three characters you have to choose. King Arthur's kind of like your kind of your all well-rounded person. Percival's like a bigger giant guy, kind of like Hagar from Final Fight, where he's this big dude that's strong and powerful but slow. And then the other guy, Lancelot, is smaller but lighter and quick, so more finesse, as opposed to Arthur. I choose Arthur just because, just like a lot of those beat 'em ups, like whether it's Streets of Rage or whatever, you give yourself an all-around character, usually it leads to a pretty good experience. So that's usually who I like to be. But you can switch it too. If when you die, you have the choice of switching your characters. So if you're not really happy with, Arthur, you can switch it to Percival or Lancelot at that time, or you can just stick with, that character you've always been. So a really fun one. Definitely one of my more favorite games, and one that, like if I have, other people over, it's the kind of game that you like want to show them, like, hey, you want to try something fun? Here's a fun one. Okay, I mentioned that gaming store that I found, like the Terminator in. Another game I found actually a couple, like last year, was Dusty Diamond's All-Star Softball, which is one of the more collectible sports games for the Nintendo. This is a Broderbund title. It's actually a pretty awesome game. I mean, I know it's softball, so really it's ostensibly a baseball game. But you have all these kind of weird characters that have like different abilities, and it's actually a pretty sweet little game. And again, it's not a game you see around in the wild very much. So when I saw it in a glass case, and I think it was about $90, I just couldn't say no, just because, I've been going to that game store for over 20 years and never seen it. And that's the one beauty of a local game shop, is you never know what you're going to see when you walk in, and especially for retro games. And hey, it was my lucky day. So I quickly grabbed that one, and I don't know, it's a really good one. I think it's an underrated title for sure. Speaking of Nintendo games, another one that I always wanted and finally got was Bucky O'Hare. This was a relatively late release Konami game, based on a short-lived cartoon series where I think they were kind of going for something between kind of like Mega Man / Darkwing Duck / maybe like Battletoads. So you're Bucky O'Hare, you're the crew of this spaceship with your other animal friends, and they all get kind of shipped off to these different worlds that have different, I guess you'd say, features about them. Some are ice, some the gravity's lighter or weaker, some stronger. And you go through it, and you go through it also as different characters. And the characters, just like one would expect, they're different. They have different attributes, strengths, and weaknesses. And it's actually a pretty fun little game. And it was one that I always wanted as a kid. But again, it was hard to find it. And of course, by the time I was able to really go back into this, it was also a pretty expensive game. And so I always was kind of put off by the cost. But finally, I guess I decided just to bite the bullet. And I managed to pick one up. And it's a lot of fun. And I'm glad I did it. So this was definitely one of those games I told myself, if I had 10 games I have to get, Bucky O'Hare was definitely one of them. And so I'm glad I did it. And then I have one last game, and I know this might make some of you roll your eyes. And the person that's on the cover, I'm not necessarily his biggest fan, but it's on there. This is so obviously video gaming has all different kinds of fans. People that love the games and in some ways try to keep the games living on in some way, shape, or form. And part of that is, especially in sports games, is creating ROMs where they make modifications of the game to where they try to keep the game, I guess, say current. And a very popular game that I remember from my childhood very well was Tecmo Bowl, and of course its sequel, Super Tecmo Bowl, or Tecmo Super Bowl, I should say. And people love that game. They loved it, whether it was just because you enjoyed being Bo Jackson and running everyone over, or just outrunning them, or both, or being Lawrence Taylor just tearing people apart defensively. And of course, in Tecmo Super Bowl, a lot of people wanted to be Barry Sanders because he was just absolutely broken in that, or OP in that game. So what if you took that game and put new rosters to it? So there's a place on Etsy who puts new rosters for basically Tecmo Super Bowl. And that's what this is. This is Tecmo Super Bowl 2024. And I got this for the holidays. Yeah, you can see Jalen Hurts is on the cover. And again, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a Jalen Hurts fan or anything. That's just what it is. But you can play with today's rosters. And so, I can play as the Vikings, and, I know Kirk Cousins isn't on our team anymore, which is, I don't want to get into that, but I'll just say, fine, he's not there anymore. But, you can throw passes to Justin Jefferson, instead of just throwing it to Chris Carter or whoever we had back in the late 90s. And so, I don't know, it's kind of cool just to play it with modern rosters. Playbooks have been switched up a little bit too, so it's not like you're just playing with the same plays, just with different people. So, again, it's kind of a love letter to a classic. And the thing that I love, rather than just playing a ROM like you would on like a jailbroken thing, I actually have the cart. And it's fun putting this card in. People first of all see it and they're like, "What? 2024?" I know that's part of to me, that's kind of the cool thing. It's another one that sits, it looks cool on the shelf, and it's also fun to play. And I don't know, it's another classic. It's both retro and new at the same time, which I think is like the best of both worlds. So that's it for me. Those are some games I've collected over the last year. I hope you enjoyed it. So if you, I don't know, as you watch this, whether you had memories of these games yourself or questions or whatever, I guess just leave a comment. I'll try to respond when I can. But otherwise, I don't know. I have more games that I picked up over the last year. I just found these ones because I knew for sure I hadn't shown these off a year ago. So that I just wanted to, show what I picked up over that time. So anyways, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful holiday, and I'll catch you next time.